really handsome. Annoyed, the blonde warrior orders Zichmore to pay attention to what he is saying. He then warns that he will tell everyone all the bad things the young man has done. We find out that the young man annihilated hundreds of holy knights from the Order of Kuruaman, including good people. But his greatest atrocity surely was. The protagonist stops listening and can only think about how naturally the man talks. When he focuses again, he hears the warrior stating that it is for all those committed sins that his punishment will be death. Angrily, Zik reflects on how hearing all that nonsense from the guy irritates him, even though it's all true. But if he simply surrenders like this, it will be a waste of his title as Demon Lord. Soon, he will have to use the key that distorts fate to land one last blow on his unbearable opponent. We discover that the protagonist holds in his hands a blade that alters the target's fate and changes their future. The warrior in front of him prepares to deliver justice with his sword, stating that he hopes the young man can do good in his next life. In response, Zich says he will if given the chance, but it won't be today. We see that even after being struck, the young man was able to stand up. To say that he needs to do something first, with one hand behind his back, he starts activating the blade, making a shining purple light radiate through the surroundings. Looking into his opponent's eyes, our boy says this is his last strike. A hole appears in the blonde young man's armor and he doesn't understand what's happening. We see that tree roots start to emerge on his skin. Furious, he asks how the protagonist did that. With an evil smile, he replies that judging by how angry he looks, the trick must have worked. Not giving up, the blue-caped warrior strikes again with his sword, ending the Demon Lord's life. Thinking to himself, he says he died in vain but carries no regrets. We are taken to another place. Through a window, sunlight enters to signal that the day has just begun. In bed, Zich wakes up annoyed by the birdsong that interrupted his precious sleep. Suddenly, he realizes where he is, and becomes confused as he stares at his own legs covered by the sheet, then looking at his own hands, bringing them to his neck, where he had received the fatal blow. The young man decides to get out of bed quickly, stopping in front of a mirror. That's when he realizes he is young again. Intrigued, he remembers the battle and says he is sure he lost to Glenn and his companions, and that he used the key that distorts fate on the boy before being dragged away. But he can't remember what happened after that. Looking around, Zich concludes that the only thing he knows now is that he has gone back to the past when he still lived with his family. So his next step must be to recover the key that distorts fate. Suddenly, the door to his room opens while the boy is in the middle of his mental confusion. Hearing footsteps, he wonders how someone dares to invade the room of the eldest son of a noble family. A blonde boy appears and, calling him his lord, asks why he hasn't left the room yet. Even without remembering who the young man is, Zich smiles upon realizing that at least the boy treats him with respect. The young man standing at the door then says that the protagonist usually goes out at dawn, since he is no longer in a position to sleep in until late. Raising his finger, our boy asks his servant to come closer. The young man immediately obeys and asks what he wants. In silence, the protagonist just stares at him firmly, then punches the boy hard in the face. With his hand on his cheek, the boy asks why the young man did that. But Zich approaches and we can see that he carries a dark look on his face, making the blonde boy realize that he is completely screwed. Suddenly, boots hit his body, throwing him hard to the ground. Furious, the protagonist starts stomping on his servant's head, while delivering kick after kick without stopping. Trying to get up, the boy asks for forgiveness through his tears, and we hear a voice asking what's happening. But it's no use, and the young man continues to beat the servant, stopping only when someone enters the room. The blonde boy quickly runs into the arms of Sir Halton. Standing there, the man states that he asked a question, which irritates the protagonist, who feels disrespected. Sighing, he decides to approach the boy and the man, who asks why the young man doesn't answer. With a mocking look, a protagonist says that Halton is a bit rude, and the man asks if he's going to beat him up too. Smiling, our boy says he doesn't see why not, since a bastard who does not recognize his master must be taught a lesson until he learns to treat authority with respect. The warrior then asks if he has the skill to carry out that threat. Backing off, Zich says the man is right since he cannot defeat him in his current state. But as a master, he cannot allow a mere bastard to be disobedient without receiving punishment. Furious, Halton asks if the boy even knows who he's talking to. Suddenly, a tablecloth flies toward him. With his head covered, the man struggles as he asks what trick that is. Desperate, the blonde boy screams the warrior's name. We see the protagonist appear in the air, ready to strike using a flower pot, which shatters into pieces as soon as it hits the man's head. Wiping his hands while watching his opponent on the ground, our boy says that strength isn't everything. And looking at the little blonde boy, he states that now he can go back to what he was doing before. We see the poor boy sweating cold as a fist flies toward his face. Outside the room, screams of someone calling for help are heard. Later, in another place, Zich stops in front of two huge doors, while remembering how scared he used to be to enter that room in the past. About to open the doors, he states that now he feels absolutely nothing. Inside, we see 5 people staring at him firmly, including the boy he beat and Halton, who has finally woken up after being struck. In the man's eyes, we can see rage in its purest form. He remembers earlier moments when a red-haired boy warned him that the matter had already reached his father. who was extremely disappointed to learn that a knight of the Steelwall house was taken down in such a ridiculous manner. We discover that the boy is Greg Steelwall, Zich's half-brother, who, placing his hand over the man's face, asks if he did something wrong and warns that if not, he should keep his head held high. After all, they are dealing with his half-brother. Back to the present moment, the man sitting on the throne says that the protagonist is late. The man is none other than Count Bordeaux Steelwall, the biological father of our boy. Snorting and rolling his eyes, Zich asks why he was summoned. Such an attitude makes his father narrow his eyes and ask if he has forgotten that you should treat him with respect. Not caring, the boy replies that he doesn't need to be respectful since the man doesn't even recognize that he is his father. Bordeaux then asks how he expects to inherit the title of Count with such deplorable behavior. The boy questions what his father is talking about when he mentions the word inherit, and whether he's really planning to recognize him as his legitimate son. Hearing this deeply irritates Lord Steelwall, but his wife places her hand on his shoulder, then says that she warned him about the boy's behavior. The woman is named Floral Steelwall and is Zich's stepmother. She says the protagonist has always been disrespectful and rude. Her words make our boy clench his fist because he clearly remembers how the woman and her son are cruel, and how they always tried to get rid of him. Changing his attitude, the boy bows and says it was all a misunderstanding, then calls the woman mother while smiling mockingly. Floral glares at him with bloodshot eyes. Zich then asks if he was called there because of Halton and the blonde boy, and turning his back, apologizes to his father, claiming that he made a mistake while picking up a sword. The boy and the knight watch everything, trying to understand what will happen next. Bordeaux widens his eyes, as does Greg, who starts sweating cold. The protagonist points the sword at the blonde boy and says he's going to clean up his mess right there. We discover that the young boy is named Hans, and he is a servant of the Steelwall family. The head of the family stands up and asks how the boy dares to draw a sword in front of him, making his other son smile. Turning around, Zich says that anyone who insults the heir of the Steelwall family must die, and that he thought that was the reason for the meeting. The boy's stepmother steps into the discussion to order the boy to stop, as she knows Hans never insulted him. Placing the sword on the ground, the protagonist then asks if they are saying that he is lying. The blonde boy, in a panic, thinks that if he says anything wrong, he's done for and no one will be able to stop it. Meanwhile, the demon lord can only reflect on why the countess is protecting Hans like that. Stepping forward, Halton says that Hans is telling the truth, and that the protagonist is indeed lying. Zich smiles, revealing that he didn't expect that. Floral approaches and asks if the knight is sure. He replies yes, because the truth is that both he and the boy were attacked by the young man for no reason. Mocking, our boy says it's funny. The man admits he was attacked by someone like him, then asks if he also has no interest in admitting he was wrong. The man says he only told the truth. Zich then asks if Halton is really going to insist that he's innocent, and if that's the case, it should resolve this situation with a duel. Annoyed, the knight asks if the boy is being serious. With his sword pointed at the man, the protagonist asks his father if that isn't the right thing to do, then states that if he loses the duel, he will also lose the chance to be heir. His father then says he allows the duel to happen. Grinning, Halton says he will do whatever his lord orders, while our boy also smiles and thanks his father. Leaving, Zich asks to get informed of the time and place of the battle. Thinking to himself, Bordeaux says that he was just thinking about scolding his son and sending him back to his room. But this might be the perfect opportunity to give the position to Greg. Before leaving the room, the protagonist says he almost changed his mind, because he realized that even if he wins, he won't get what he wants. His father asks what he's referring to, and whether it's about the title of Count. The boy simply says there's nothing more to say because he would never understand, so in that case, he'll see him on the day of the duel. Outside the house, while testing his abilities, Zich thinks about how he is now in the body of a 19-year-old boy, who in the past was very weak and naive and only cared about getting daddy's approval, and didn't even know how to handle a sword since the man wouldn't let him take fencing lessons. At that time, he had no idea of the massive and destructive power that was dormant inside him. We discover that each person has a limit to the amount of mana, but Zich's limit is extremely high compared to the limit of an average person. While using his power, our boy feels a pain in his chest. Suddenly, an explosion happens and throws him backward. On the ground, he thinks that as expected, it's impossible to immediately return to the mana level he had when he was a demon lord, since he had to go through many trials to achieve such a title. And it was remarkable how things kept happening to him one after another, almost as if everything had been planned by someone. Our young man decides to get up from the ground, then orders Greg to stop spying on him and leave. His half-brother wonders how he discovered his presence. Emerging from behind a tree, he asks if Zich has finally awakened his mana, and if he truly believes he can win the duel and inherit the title with those skills. Smiling, Greg also questions why his younger brother suddenly started acting so differently, instead of keeping his head down as he always did, in order to secure a reward later. The protagonist approaches his half-brother and stares at him seriously. With veins bulging on his face, he says he knows that Greg is afraid he will inherit the title, but the red-haired boy denies such an accusation, then states that if he cannot deal with someone like Zich, he should indeed give up on the title. Zich places his hand on the young man's shoulder and asks if he is certain about that. because in that case he will have to fulfill his older brother's wish and resolve the succession dispute in a more forceful manner, as he was raised. Pushing the protagonist's hand away, Grade asks if he is truly challenging him to a duel. Our young man then asks what his answer to the proposal is, and his brother replies that he has no reason to refuse. Walking away, the black-haired boy says that everything is settled then, and that he will choose the time and place. The day of the duel between Zich and Halton arrives. The man in the center of the battlefield shouts that he took the lesson he received seriously, but now it is his turn to teach the boy a lesson, and that today he will show that it is skill that determines victory or defeat. Holding his sword, our young man wonders what his opponent is talking about. Someone else slowly approaches. It is a knight with gray hair, who then asks if Halton is ready. The man promptly responds yes, while the protagonist looks at him mockingly. The knight then announces that the duel has begun. Without wasting time, Bai charges forward, and Zich decides to do the same. The two stop face to face, engaging in a sword fight. While blocking his opponent's strike, our young man remarks that despite everything, he is still a knight. Upon hearing this, something triggers in the man's mind, who immediately starts smiling. Raising his sword to deliver a fatal blow, he asks the boy, calling him Sir, how it feels. Now that he has realized that if they fight fairly, he will never be able to win. The sequence of strikes forces Zich to step back. Without hesitation, the knight delivers another attack, with his sword glowing in a reddish hue. Fortunately, the protagonist manages to defend, but it is evident that he has begun sweating cold, unlike Halton, who keeps smiling. In the reserve area, the members of the Steelwolf family watch the battle unfold. Our young man takes another hit, and a man tells Bordeaux that his son is performing better than expected, as he has already blocked several attacks. Floralyn says that even so, the knight still holds the advantage. The elder agrees, stating that in the end, Zich never properly learned the art of the sword, while the woman glares at him furiously. The boy's father continues watching without saying a single word. In the audience, the crowd chants Halton's name, demanding that he finish the boy. Smiling, the knight asks if the protagonist can hear that, then states that now he has the duty to give the spectators what they want. With a different movement, the man breaks free from the boy's block, and about to deliver another strike, orders that if the boy wishes to keep his body intact, he must surrender immediately. Holding his sword, which shines in a shade of blue, our young man replies that surrendering is out of the question, because he is just getting started. In his mind, Zich reflects that he does not know if that trick will work, but he has to try. Halton, seeing the boy advancing toward him, is stunned, clearly realizing what is about to happen. Our young man then unleashes a strike called Extension of the Senses, which finally wipes the smile off the knight's face. Swiftly, the man does everything he can to dodge all the waves of light, managing to escape successfully, unlike the ground, which is now completely cracked. Still holding his sword, the protagonist starts trembling, because his mana is still unstable and out of control. The two stare at each other from a distance. Shocked, the spectators wonder if they really saw that, while the old family servant wonders if that was really the sense extension technique, a skill where the person synchronizes their body and sword with mana, moving it as an extension of their hands and feet. Sweating cold, Halton wonders in his thoughts when the boy learns such a technique, then concludes that even so, the way he uses mana still seems sloppy with movements out of sync. So since his opponent is just Zich Steelwall, it's time to stop playing. The man charges to attack again, with his sword releasing flames. He then aims his weapon at the protagonist, determined to end the fight, then launches a fierce strike. To his surprise, our boy dodges it with ease. Halton then reveals that he has one more little surprise, and while shouting that he wants to see the boy dodge this, he launches another strike. We see that this time Zich has no way out. A huge explosion happens due to the strike called Piercing Space. Our boy appears lying with his back in a crater that opened from the impact of his body. All the spectators start shouting, saying they expected nothing less from someone like Halton, who starts smiling while saying that the result has already been decided. So there's no reason for Zich to risk his life any further. Suddenly something hits the ground. It's the protagonist's sword who, getting up, says that with that body he cannot beat his opponent with techniques, but with real combat. Without hesitation, he charges at the knight at full speed, then drags his sword on the ground, which kicks up dust everywhere, including into the knight's face. The protagonist then takes advantage of his opponent being blinded to attack him with full force using his body, brutally slamming the man to the ground. Halton is still breathing and sits up while wiping his eyes. Annoyed, he says that strike was nothing more than a cheap trick, but suddenly realizes that the tip of Zich's sword is pointed at his neck. The boy then asks if he's going to say that after losing a battle in real life, while the knight glares at him. With no way out, he says he surrenders. Our boy then says that the only reasons he didn't win were his arrogance and fear of killing the eldest son of the Steelwall family. But if he learns the lesson, he can grow and become stronger. The gray-haired knight appears and prepares to declare the winner, leaving all the spectators anxious, as well as the protagonist's half-brother. The man then announces that the winner is Zich Steelwall. The outraged crowd starts shouting, saying it's unfair because the boy cheated, which goes against the knight's code. Mocking the protagonist, says what matters is winning. Up above, Bordeaux asks when his son learned to use mana techniques if no one ever taught him. At his side, the servant asks if he hasn't realized that Zich always had a natural gift. Furious, Greg thinks that it's impossible that his half-brother is still standing after the strike he received from the knight. But suddenly someone shouts his name. On the battlefield, the protagonist calls him down because it's time for the duel they scheduled, and that he warned you would choose the time and place. Crossing his arms, the head of the Steelwall family asks what he's talking about. In response, our boy asks why his father is pretending to be dumb if he already approved it. Confused, two young men say that then the rumors that the two brothers would fight for the Count title were true. They just don't understand how Zich wants to duel again if he's injured. Shouting, the protagonist asks what Greg is waiting for, that he hasn't come down yet, since that kind of attitude just makes him look like a coward. The boy's father then orders him to come down, leaving him surprised. Bordeaux then asks if he's really afraid of fighting his half-brother who is injured. Not wanting to dishonor his father, the red-haired boy decides to come down. Approaching our boy, he wonders why he is smiling like that. And grabbing his sword, he still thinks to himself that he no longer recognizes his brother. Suddenly, Zich calls his name, then asks if he's standing there like an idiot because he's waiting for an attack from him. And that if that's the case, as the older brother, he'll take the first step. Grieg sees his brother approaching at high speed and starts sweating cold, but manages to block the first strike successfully, then realizes that something there isn't right. Since the protagonist isn't using strength in his attack, as he shouldn't have expected anything different from his brother, he decides to strike back, stating that he will be the heir of House Steelwall. Caught by surprise, our boy grits his teeth, concluding that due to his injuries, he won't be able to use mana again. So if he wants to finish this, there's only one way. Zich lets out a small laugh out loud, and we can see someone's strawberry juice start dripping onto the ground, being his own as he grabbed the blade of Greg's sword, asking him if he knows the March of Death. With his power activated and using only one hand, he breaks his younger brother's sword, leaving him speechless. With his darkest glare, the protagonist says that if Greg doesn't surrender now, this will be his last day alive, and without hesitation, strikes him with the hilt of the sword, right in the middle of his face. The red-haired boy ends up falling to the ground like a sack of potatoes, groaning in pain and missing a tooth. Suddenly, Zich stabs the sword into the ground right next to his head, and standing in front of him, stares at him in a terrifying way. Crying, the protagonist's half-brother says that he surrenders. The knight responsible for announcing the winner approaches, informing everyone that our boy has won again. The spectators are left speechless and in disbelief, while the black-haired boy, looking at his father, says that he won. So he must now fulfill his promise and acknowledge that he is the legitimate heir to the title of Count. Furious, Bordeaux shouts, asking how a mere duel can actually decide anything. Someone then says that Zich won both duels and asks if the man will really break his promise in such a dishonorable way. Showing no surprise, the protagonist removes the family ring from his finger and throws it toward his father, stating that he never really wanted the title anyway. The ring spins until it stops at the foot of the head of the Steelwall family, who can only think about how reckless his son is. Stepping in, Floral begs her husband to stay calm, but the furious man shouts, asking what the meaning of that attitude is. Zich then declares that he is leaving the family from that moment on. Someone carries Greg out of the arena, but the boy calls him to ask him to never forget that to win a fight, one must never fear death, especially with the borders of Steelwall County constantly under attack. So if he wants to protect his home, he will have to become stronger. The red-haired boy doesn't even look back, he just keeps walking away. Our boy follows his brother's servant and grabs a potion from his belt without asking. After drinking the liquid, his wounds begin to heal, as he prays that House Steelwall does not forget what it learned that day. Later, outside the mansion gate, Zich prepares to leave but decides that first he needs to pull something on Hans, who widens his eyes when he sees something coming his way. We go back a few hours earlier when the boy was carrying a basket of clothes and humming through the hallways, being interrupted by Zich, who stops right in front of him. Because it was dark, Hans asks who's there, and upon seeing the protagonist, he panics. But our boy says he will accept him as his servant, warning that if he refuses, he'll annihilate him right there. With no way out, the young man says he'll go with him. In the present moment, we discover that what hits the servant is the protagonist's suitcase, who orders him to carry his stuff. As they start walking, our boy thinks that he can't believe he's forgiving a servant who insulted him, all because he's too kind. Looking at Hans, he states in his thoughts that the boy will be useful, but first, he needs to increase his stamina and be trained. Out loud, the boy asks his servant to call him only Lord Zich from now on. The boy then asks what the plan is, but the demon lord says that nothing is defined yet, only that the first stop will be in Porty territory. After that, they'll go wherever life takes them, because now he will try to be a good person. Sometime later, farther away from home, Hans calls the protagonist's attention to say that this is not the path people usually follow. Zich says he knows, but that the original path is too winding, unlike walking in a straight line. The boy then says that monsters roam around those parts, but our boy states that's exactly why they came that way, making his servants start sweating cold. Suddenly, a noise catches the blonde boy's attention, who starts trying to convince himself that he must have just heard things. The two walk a bit further into the forest. Hans keeps freaking out in fear, wishing to get out of there as quickly as possible. Zich then calls him, snapping him out of his thoughts. Handing a sword into the boy's hands, the protagonist says it's time for him to test his skills. Not understanding, the young man asks what he's talking about, but our boy simply tells his servant to look behind him. Obeying, he turns around and immediately panics, because in the middle of the bushes, a creature with red eyes is lurking. It's a goblin who, upon seeing the boys, starts smiling, which makes Hans's legs begin to fail. Terrified, the boy says he doesn't know how to use a sword and asks if he could fight with a bigger weapon instead. Zich tells him to stop whining or else he'll get kicked, which might actually be a good thing in the end. Tired of all the chatter, the creature jumps to attack, making the servant scream and run back and forth, even though it's pretty small. Our boy then thinks that this will be more work than he expected,